The correlation between corruption and poverty to economic growth. Problems caused by corruption and poverty in developing countries have many questioning the effectiveness of economic growth and development. Lack of convergence in living standards, greed, and the potential for abuse of delegated powers are some of the unresolved issues in development and growth economics. Corruption. It is the misuse of entrusted power for private gain. Researchers such as Kruger, Miradal, Shilver, and Vishny, Tanzi, and Morrow have found that corruption contributes to economic growth. Claims to impair Alizina also states that corruption alters the goal of government, diverting resources from public to private purposes and resulting in a loss of social well-being. However, poverty, it is a person that doesn't have enough money to afford basic needs. For example, in a country in Nigeria, a well-known bribery case in which it involved the international oil employer referred to as Shell to provide Nigerian humans of over $1.1 billion as the cash went to corrupt officers in place of the national budget. In the meantime, in step with the World Financial Institution, extra than 50% of the populace of the oil-rich country live in extreme poverty. Moving on to literature review on corruption. According to the authors below, we can conclude that corruption has a negative impact toward economic growth. However, if there is a variable that affects the economic growth, it will affect corruption as well by reducing the level of corruption index. The example of variables that has a positive impact towards economic growth are import and wages. Moving on to the literature review on poverty. According to the authors below, we can conclude that poverty has a negative impact toward economic growth as well. However, if there is a variable that affects the economic growth, it will affect poverty by reducing the level of poverty index. The examples of variables that has a positive impact towards economic growth are business freedom, investment, life expectancy, education, employment, and per capita income. Moving on to model and data description. Here are the four models that I stated below. In this research, I'll be using ordinary least squares regression method. For the variable of interest, I used the initial GNI 1991 as the indicator, and for the five control variables are stated below. There are investment per GNI, total labor of growth and depreciation, secondary school enrollment, corruption perception index or CPI, and lastly, there are poverty. Moving on to the results. The results of the model estimation analysis can be seen in this table. Based on the table above, the regression results show that the corruption perception index has a negative and significant effect on economic growth only in 42 Asian countries. Therefore, the government of these countries must protect and clean their countries from corrupt practices so that sustainable economic growth can be achieved. Also, based on the regression result, it can be seen that poverty has a positive and significant value on GDP growth in 42 Asian countries, but has a negative and insignificant value in 139 countries in the world. This shows that a country with a high poverty rate will have a low economic growth rate. On the other hand, countries with low poverty rates will have a high economic growth rates. Moving on to these two graphs. From the two graphs above, the two indicators have a negative relationship to GDP growth. That is, the increase that occurred between CPI and poverty was followed by a decrease in GDP growth. And if CPI and poverty decrease, GDP growth will increase. From the two graphs, it can also be seen that the two indicators have a scattering plot. Thus, it can be concluded that the relationship between CPI and poverty variables with GDP growth is a very small or there is no relationship at all. Lastly, we have conclusion. On the conclusion, economic growth is impacted by corruption and poverty together, as seen by the link between these three factors. This suggests that corruption and poverty are factors that affect prediction of future economic growth. In the future, it will be important to take into accountable that the combined effect of corruption and poverty. The interaction between poverty, economic progress, and corruption demonstrate that one factor has an effect on the other. For accurate forecasting of future corruption, sufficient knowledge about historical economic growth and poverty is required. That is all for my video today. Thank you for watching.